The Lagoon House. Beaches have always terrified me. They didn't used to. When I was a kid, the beach meant freedom, sunburns, ice cream, and the smell of salt in the air. But that changed one summer night, when I learned that the ocean doesn't just take people away. Sometimes it brings things back. I was 16 when it happened. My best friend Charles invited me and our other friend Riley to spend a weekend at his family's beach house on Long Beach Island. It was supposed to be one of those perfect teenage weekends. No parents, no rules, just us, the water, and a whole lot of bad decisions. The house sat right along a lagoon, one of those narrow channels with other houses lined up on the opposite side. From the back deck, you could look straight across the water and see their docks stretching into the darkness. Charles's family's place had 2 stories, a small pool, and a spiral staircase leading from the upstairs deck straight to the yard. It was the kind of setup that made us feel rich, even though we weren't. We got there in the afternoon, unpacked, and immediately started planning how to spend the night. Charles and Riley were both texting girls. I had brought some weed. Riley had borrowed a few bottles of his dad's whiskey, and everything felt perfect. Eventually, we convinced 3 girls from school, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, to come over. They arrived around sunset, and soon we were all half drunk, floating in the pool, music blasting, smoke drifting into the night air. The night was warm, the water still, and for a moment, I remember thinking nothing bad could ever happen here. Then, Charles suddenly turned the music down. He was staring past us, over the lagoon. His eyes were locked on something in the distance. At first, I thought he was just stoning out, but then he said quietly, "Do you see that?" I turned around. Across the lagoon at the end of the opposite dock, there was a shape. Tall, thin, perfectly still. It looked like a person just standing there, facing us. I laughed and said, "Dude, it's probably just someone hanging out." Charles didn't laugh. "No," he whispered. "I know that family. They're in Florida for the week." The girls went quiet. I could feel the shift, the laughter fading, the breeze suddenly colder. But before we could say anything else, movement caught my eye. More shapes. 3 more figures stepped out from the shadows, joining the first. 4 in total. Standing side by side, all facing our direction. For a few seconds, none of us moved. Then a car passed on the road behind us, and its headlights briefly lit the opposite dock. What I saw made my stomach drop. They were definitely people, tall men, unmoving, their faces swallowed by darkness. "Inside," Charles said sharply. "Now." We stumbled out of the pool, dripping water everywhere. Riley slid the glass door shut and locked it. The 6 of us stood there in the living room, our wet footprints shining under the ceiling lights. Nobody spoke, and then we heard it. 4 splashes, one after another. They were in the water. The sound of splashing grew louder, closer, until it was right behind the house. The girls were crying now. Riley locked the front door. Charles ran upstairs, and I stood frozen, staring at the black glass of the sliding door, waiting for a face to appear behind it. Then, above us, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, creaking across the upstairs deck. That was all it took. We ran, every one of us. Riley fumbled with his car keys. Charles shouted for us to move faster. We piled into the car, the engine stuttering to life, gravel spraying as Riley floored it out of the driveway. He clipped the mailbox on the way out, but nobody cared. We called the police once we were far enough away. When we finally returned with them, the damage was done. The house had been ransacked, drawers emptied, rooms torn apart. The upstairs was the worst. Every valuable thing was gone. And then the officer came outside and said something that made all of us go cold. The boat's gone too. Charles's dad's Boston whaler, a mid-size motorboat that had been tied to the dock, gone without a trace. The police assumed the intruders swam across, robbed the house, found the spare key in the hidden hatch, and escaped by water. They said it was probably an inside job, maybe someone who knew the family. But I remember those figures. They didn't move like burglars. They moved like people who already knew we were there. The police never found the boat, never caught anyone. Eventually summer ended, and we all went our separate ways. But I never stopped locking my doors after that. Years passed. I went to college, moved cities, tried to forget. But some things you just can't. Then a few months ago, I ran into Charles at our high school reunion. We hadn't talked in years. He looked older, quieter. There was something in his eyes I didn't like. We ended up at a small bar after the reunion, just the two of us. We talked about college, work, relationships. Everything normal, until I brought up that night. At first, he just stared at his drink. Then he said, "You're not gonna believe this, but it happened again." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, again?" He told me about his younger brother, Kieran. He's 19 now, and apparently even dumber than we were at that age. Last summer, Kieran took their new family boat, the one they bought after the insurance payout, and went out drinking with friends near Carl Island, part of a restricted wildlife refuge. They dropped anchor close to shore, planning to swim to the island and hang out under the stars. As they sat on the sand, one of Kieran's friends noticed another boat anchored further down the beach. Same size, same shape, same faint blue stripe along the side. Kieran swore it looked exactly like their family's old boat, the one that had been stolen years ago. He and his friends swam out to get a closer look. The more they saw, the more convinced they became. The same markings, the same worn-out railing, everything. But as they floated beside it, one of the boys froze and whispered, "There's someone on the beach." A man was walking toward them, slowly at first, then faster, and in his hands, glinting in the moonlight, a shovel. They bolted, swimming back as fast as they could. The man started running. By the time they reached their boat, they could hear his footsteps hitting the water behind them. They fired up the engine and sped off, but behind them, they heard another motor start. Someone was following them. Kieran said the ride back was the longest, most terrifying trip of his life. He could hear the faint hum of a boat behind them the entire time. But every time he turned, there were no lights, just black water and distant echoes. They made it home and swore to never talk about it again. The next morning, guilt got the best of Kieran, and he told his parents everything, except the part about drinking. They called the police, but nothing came of it. Charles leaned across the table, his voice low. "The cops found footprints on the island," he said. "But they didn't find another boat, or anyone." He paused, staring off like he was reliving it. Then he said, They said the footprints just stopped, like whoever it was walked into the water and never came back out. We sat there in silence for a long time after that. I didn't know what to say. When I drove home that night, the road took me along the lagoon again, the same stretch of water from all those years ago. The moonlight was bright, the surface perfectly still. And then I saw it, a small white boat, drifting quietly near the opposite bank. No lights, no movement, just a dark figure standing at the edge, holding something long and metallic, something that caught the moonlight like polished steel. I blinked, and it was gone, like it had never been there. But the air smelled of salt, and the ripples on the water were moving toward me.